A passenger car is a piece of railway rolling stock that is designed to carry passengers. The term passenger car can also be associated with a sleeping car, baggage, dining, railway, post office and prisoner transport cars. History: 19th century. First passenger cars and early development. Up until about the end of the 19th century, most passenger cars were constructed of wood. The first passenger trains did not travel very far, but they were able to haul many more passengers for a longer distance than any wagons pulled by horses. One of the early coach designs was the Stanhope. It featured a roof and small holes in the floor for drainage when it rained, and had separate compartments for different classes of travel. The only problem with this design is that the passengers were expected to stand for their entire trip. The first passenger cars in the United States resembled stagecoaches. They were short, often less than 10 feet long, and had 2 axles. British railways had a head start on American railroads, with the first bed carriage being built there as early as 1838 for use on the London and Birmingham Railway and the Grand Junction Railway. Britain's early sleepers, when made up for sleeping, extended the foot of the bed into a boot section at the end of the carriage. The cars were still too short to allow more than 2 or 3 beds to be positioned end to end. Britain's Royal Mail commissioned and built the first travelling post office cars in the late 1840s as well. These cars resembled coaches in the short wheelbase and exterior design, but were equipped with nets on the sides of the cars to catch mail bags while the train was in motion. American RPOs, first appearing in the 1860s, also featured equipment to catch mail bags at speed, but the American design more closely resembled a large hook that would catch the mail bag in its crook. When not in use, the hook would swivel down against the side of the car to prevent it from catching obstacles. As locomotive technology progressed in the mid-19th century, trains grew in length and weight. Passenger cars, particularly in America, grew along with them, first getting longer with the addition of a second truck, and wider as the suspensions improved. Cars built for European use featured side-door compartments, while American car design favored what was called the train coach, a single long cabin with rows of seats, with doors located at the ends of the car. Early American sleeping cars were not compartmented, but by the end of the 19th century they were. The compartments in the later sleepers were accessed from a side hall running the length of the cars, similar to the design of European cars well into the 20th century. Many American passenger trains, particularly the long-distance ones, included a car at the end of the train called an observation car. Until about the 1930s, these had an open-air platform at the rear, the observation platform. These evolved into the closed-end car, usually with a rounded end, which was still called an observation car. The interiors of observation cars varied. Many had special chairs and tables. The end platforms of all passenger cars changed around the turn of the 20th century. Older cars had open platforms between cars. Passengers would enter and leave a car through a door at the end of the car, which led to a narrow platform. Steps on either side of the platform were used for getting on or off the train, and one might hop from one car platform to another. Later cars had enclosed platforms called vestibules, which together with gangway connections allowed passengers not only to enter and exit the train, protected from the elements, but also to move more easily between cars with the same protection. Dining cars first appeared in the late 1870s and into the 1880s. Until this time, the common practice was to stop for meals at restaurants along the way. At first, the dining car was simply a place to serve meals that were picked up en route, but they soon evolved to include galleys in which the meals were prepared. The introduction of vestibuled cars, which for the first time allowed easy movement from car to car, aided the adoption of dining cars, lounge cars, and other specialized cars. 1900 to 1950. Lighter materials. New car types. By the 1920s, passenger cars on the larger standard gauge railroads were normally between 60 feet and 70 feet long. The cars of this time were still quite ornate, many of them being built by experienced coachmakers and skilled carpenters. In the United States, the so-called chair car with individual seating became commonplace on long-distance routes. With the 1930s came the widespread use of stainless steel for car bodies. The typical passenger car was now much lighter than its heavyweight wood cousins of old. The new lightweight and streamlined cars carried passengers in speed and comfort to an extent that had not been experienced to date. Aluminum and corten steel were also used in lightweight car construction, but stainless steel was the preferred material for car bodies. Stainless steel cars could be, and often were, left unpainted except for the cars reporting marks that were required by law. By the end of the 1930s, railroads and car builders were debuting car body and interior styles that could only be dreamed of before. In 1937, the Pullman Company delivered the first cars equipped with roomettes, that is, the car's interior was sectioned off into compartments, much like the coaches that were still in widespread use across Europe. Pullman's roomettes, however, were designed with the single traveler in mind. The roomette featured a large picture window, a privacy door, a single fold-away bed, a sink and small toilet. The roomette's floor space was barely larger than the space taken up by the bed, but it allowed the traveler to ride in luxury compared to the multi-level semi-private berths of old. Now that passenger cars were lighter, they were able to carry heavier loads, but the size of the average passenger that rode in them didn't increase to match the car's new capacities. The average passenger car could not be made any wider or longer due to side clearances along the railroad lines, but they generally could get taller because they were still lower than many freight cars and locomotives. So the railroads soon began building and buying dome and bi-level cars to carry more passengers. 1950 present. High technology advancements. Starting in the 1950s, the passenger travel market declined in North America, though there was growth in commuter rail. Private intercity passenger service in the U.S. mostly ended with the creation of Amtrak in 1971. Amtrak took over equipment and stations from most the railroads in the U.S. with intercity service. The higher clearances in North America enabled a major advancement in passenger car design. Bi-level commuter coaches that could hold more passengers. These cars started to become common in the United States in the 1960s, and were adopted by Amtrak for the superliner design as well as by many other railroads and manufacturers. By the year 2000, double-deckers rivaled single-level cars in use around the world. While intercity passenger rail travel declined in America, ridership continued to increase in other parts of the world. With the increase came an increased use of newer technology on existing and new equipment. The Spanish company Talgo began experimenting in the 1940s with technology that would enable the axles to steer into a curve, allowing the train to move around the curve at a higher speed. The steering axles evolved into mechanisms that would also tilt the passenger car as it entered a curve to counter the centrifugal force experienced by the train, further increasing speeds on existing track. Today, Talgo trains are used in many places in Europe, and they have also found a home in North America on some short and medium-distance routes such as Eugene, Oregon, to Vancouver, British Columbia. Another type of tilting train that is seeing widespread use across Europe is the pendolino. These trains, built by Fiat Ferroviaria, are in regular service in Italy, Portugal, Slovenia, Finland, Czech Republic and the United Kingdom. Using tilting trains, railroads are able to run passenger trains over the same tracks at higher speeds than would otherwise be possible. Amtrak continued to push the development of U.S.-designed passenger equipment even when the market demand didn't support it, ordering a number of new passenger locomotive and car types in the 1980s and 1990s. However, by the year 2000 Amtrak went to European manufacturers for the Amtrak Cascades and Acela Express trains, the premier services. These trains use new designs and are made to operate as coherent train sets. High-speed trains are made up of cars from a single manufacturer and usually of a uniform design. In the 1960s and 1970s, countries around the world started to develop trains capable of traveling in the 150 to 200 miles per hour range to rival air travel. One of the first was France's TGV, which entered service in 1981. By the year 2000, Western Europe's major cities were connected by high-speed rail service. Often tilting and high-speed cars are left in train sets throughout the service. For example, articulated cars cannot be uncoupled without special equipment because the individual cars share trucks. This gives modern trains a smooth, coherent appearance because all the cars and often the engines share a similar design and paint scheme. Heavyweight versus lightweight. A heavyweight car is one that is physically heavier than a lightweight car due to its construction. While early cars used wood construction, Pullman switched to heavyweight riveted steel construction in 1910, more or less at the same time as other rail car manufacturers. Heavyweights are said to offer a more luxurious ride due to their added mass and, usually, six-wheel trucks. The stepped roofline of early heavyweights usually consisted of a center sill section that ran the length of the car and extended above the roof sides by as much as a foot. This section of the roof usually had windows or shutters that could be opened for ventilation while the train was in motion. However, railroad crews and passengers quickly discovered that when these windows were opened on a passenger train pulled by one or more steam locomotives, smoke and soot from the locomotives tended to drift in through the windows, especially when the train went through a tunnel. In the early 20th century, air conditioning was added to heavyweight cars for the first time. An air-conditioned heavyweight car could be spotted easily since the area where the roof vent windows existed was now covered, either partially or in full, by the air conditioning duct. As lightweight cars were introduced, many heavyweight cars were repurposed into maintenance of way service by the railroads that owned them. Lightweight passenger cars required developments in steel processing that were not available until the 1920s and 1930s. By building passenger cars out of steel instead of wood, the manufacturers were able to build lighter-weight cars with smoother fluted sides and smooth roof lines. Steel cars were ushered in at the beginning of the streamline era of the 1930s, and steel has continued in use ever since then. With the use of steel for the car sides, railroads were able to offer more innovative passenger car types. Railroads did not build or use dome cars until the first lightweight cars were introduced because the sides of heavyweight cars were not strong enough to support the weight of the dome and its passengers. Lightweight cars also enabled the railroads to operate longer passenger trains. The reduced car weight meant that more passengers could be carried in a greater number of cars with the same locomotives. The cost savings in hauling capacity coupled with the increased car type options led to the quick replacement of heavyweight cars with lightweight cars.